that
Right.
made people get more on board, and people wanted to collaborate and be part of that. And that's really what this is. I see so many synergies in the exploration of AI tool sets, that it bridges gaps that conversation sometimes can't tell very well, can't articulate.
Hello, this is Brian Sykes with AI Explore. Our guest today on the AI Creators Collective is PJ Way. I just wanted to get a quick intro before we get underway with our conversation. PJ Way and I have had multiple conversations in the past. We actually got on a phone call several months back and had a great chance to chat and talk about life. And I think this is going to be a fantastic episode before we even get underway with it. So I'm going to bring him to the stage in just a second, and our conversations are just going to be enjoyable. Welcome to the AI Creators Collective. This is Brian Sykes with AI Explore, and I'm excited today to be have on the show, man, that sounds awful. I'm excited today to have on the show PJ Way, and PJ, it's really a pleasure to have you with us today. I know, of course, my time right now, it's about almost 1 o'clock, and on your time, you still have some morning time and have coffee. So, PJ, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what got you to this point in life, and just you as a creative. I'd love to kind of be able to get the world to know you better.
Well, that's very kind, Brian. Thank you so much. And I want to say, thank you for doing this. I think this is a wonderful platform. I've had the opportunity to watch the other creatives beforehand, get to see what they've talked about, and I just think it's fantastic that you engage people, that you give us an opportunity, and everybody. It's about learning. This is a very unique space. So a little bit about myself. Where to start? I'll start with my career. Professionally, I worked in technology in the IT sector for the last 20 plus years. I have been doing most recently CIO and helping to establish rural broadband connectivity across the great state of Arizona.
Nice.
Arizona is a very rural community. Most people don't realize how large the state is. But I think what I love what I do, and the reason I love what I do is because I know that it makes a difference in people's lives. When I see how it impacts, there's this economy of scale that when people have connectivity, they now have a better quality of life, better access to healthcare, education, job opportunities, and in rural communities, they've often been kind of overlooked because there was very little incentive for ISPs to be in those areas. So now today, I've been very fortunate for the past 8 years, really driving those goals and efforts, and it's been very rewarding. Rewarding from the standpoint of being able to see what it's doing for people.
Sure.
My passion when it comes to technology, well, I don't even know where to begin. I've been. My first computer was in the 80s, and my brother and I, we would sit down and we would do X's and O's from the keyboard to create images. So that, because there was no design software in the home applications in the early 80s.
Right.
It was, you wanted to draw something, you looked with X's, O's, ones and twos, and you just created these images out of what you had on the keyboard.
Right.
So, in high school, I wanted to be, I at some point wanted to be in commercial art. I took courses in high school. Now that was many, many years ago. And I applied to colleges. I got accepted. I was the kid that grew up that really couldn't afford college. Parents didn't have the opportunity. And then in the late 80s, the opportunity wasn't the same as it may be today, which is fantastic today. So I decided to join the Marine Corps. I have strewn away from art from that perspective, but I've always been a creative when it came to the places I've traveled, taking pictures, writing information, and trying to kind of capture moments in time when things were important to me. And now here I am, all these years later. I have a 3D printer beside me. I have 2 laser engravers, a CNC machine, all these things that I love to play with and learn from. I have a piece of equipment called an Emerge which is amazing technology. It utilizes ultrasound waves to create virtual images in your hand. So the
Very
ultrasound
cool.
wave touches you feel the object inside of an empty space. It's
Right.
really
Right.
remarkable.
That's awesome.
And so that's kind of how I got here where I am now. I think what I do for a career really solves problems, and it helps me investigate and learn new technology, explore, which is how I got to this space, was because when I'd seen the opportunity to start learning a new technology, I've been jumping right in.
That's cool. So you're an explorer to begin with, and so that makes you really a lifelong learner. You didn't just kind of get your master's or your education base in one thing and kind of stop and level out. And I think this is what's fun in a creative space, is the opportunity of, it's a never-ending textbook, a lesson in front of us of new things to gain and grow from.
So absolutely, it's so exciting, right? I mean, when I got out of the service, I started out as an assembler on the shop floor, putting part A, part B together, seeing some opportunities to improve the design, and I talked to engineers. They gave me an opportunity to learn on their CAD system. I was self-taught, and then I decided I was going to go to college for that. So I started going to school. I got brought up from the shop floor into engineering. I was a design engineer for a number of years, and then I was brought into IT because I was able to articulate how the technology fit better than traditional technology they had been using when we looked at new things. So my IT director was very forward-thinking and brought me in to help educate and expand the knowledge of our traditional engineering departments and how the technology worked and what we could do with it.
That's super cool. So even though you've got some of the design background and everything, you also have a bit of an engineering mind.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why I have the 3D printer, because it keeps my mind engaged with different, everything we see tends to be two-dimensional, but really we live in a 3-4-dimensional world. So we have to recognize how that fits, and when something occupies a piece of space, what does that represent and how do we envision it? So
cool. Okay, so next question then, to kind of move us into our next pieces. Can you walk us through your creative process when you're using any of the AI generative art tools? But for the ones that most people are going to be familiar with, might be Midjourney, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, maybe even ChatGPT. And what are some of the generative tools that you've had a chance to play with and enjoy?
Oh, that's so fun, right? It's so fun to think about how we engage with the things around us. Right. And probably not unlike anybody else that's spoken before. This space moves so fast. It's virtually impossible to stay on top of every new tool that comes out. And it's inspirational because I want to do something different. I find these new video tools and this new animation creation that's happening, and I'm like, I want to do that. I want to do that next, but I don't know when or how I'm getting there. So it's a matter, again, this is why we use I love the term explore, because that's really what we're doing. I have to figure out, how do I learn this? Trial and error. So a lot of my process when it comes down to the tools that I use, and yes, I use Midjourney pretty readily. ChatGPT has been a wonderful tool as well. I started out, it's funny, when it comes to our first conversations and we talk about what we're using for our first potential AI, and I was looking at the Deep Dream Generator that was put out by Google. That was one of my first explorations in trying to figure out, how does this work? What does this do? And putting in little prompts to see, oh, well, that's kind of neat, right? And from there, it's become more sophisticated. And I think not just the technology, but the user base has become much more savvy, well-educated, engaged. And then I use things like, Midjourney, DALL-E, the Deep Dream Generator. Occasionally, I'll still go in there and just play around just to see what I can come up with and what other people might be doing. And it's a great resource for seeing new pieces. ChatGPT, I've recently started exploring Kyber as a way to do kind of video, animation, motion from text prompts. And that's been fantastic too. Pulled in some remarkable results. You tie that up with some other tools that are out there. There's a lot of free tools to explore that will allow you to find open source music, or you create your own AI music and you tie that into the images that you're creating, or tie that into the video that you've created. You've got this really nice little story. I'm really proud of one piece that I created. just exploring, but it told a story in 7 seconds.
Nice.
And it's amazing, right? Because you put the music to it, you have the animation, you could see how this couple evolves, and somebody passed away and there's tragedy, right? And there's loss. But you see that whole story in 7 seconds.
Very cool.
That's really the power of what we can utilize some of this stuff for, is the storytelling.
Right. I think that's the key to everything that we're doing, is it's about a story. If you leave the story element out, you're really missing the strength and even the impact AI can play in our lives. If it's just creating pretty pictures and, great, but it's limited. When you bring that story element to the table, that's where you start really making impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how you, and that really helped me in part of my career, where what we were trying to do is provide services to rural parts of the nation. We were servicing the tribal nation, and it wasn't a matter of being able to get funding or getting the support or the collaboration through conversation of budget, through conversation of resources, what's going to be required, but it was the storytelling of how it will impact and what it did when we started seeing those impacts that made people get more on board, and people wanted to collaborate and be part of that. And that's really what this is. I see so many synergies in the exploration of AI tool sets, that it bridges gaps that conversation sometimes can't tell very well, can't articulate properly.
Right. Otherwise it's just words, it's technology, but it doesn't have a place. The story helps us be able to tie them together so we can actually see, here's the technology, here's a human being, and here's how the two can really intertwine. That's kind of been my focus, kind of primarily in the creative space, because that's my background, is working in advertising, marketing, and branding, is to communicate to that audience, okay, that thing you're doing, watch what we can do now with AI. And that's the kind of the fun part of this whole process, is looking at how does this impact your life, and then how can you utilize it going forward. So speaking in that direction, how do you personally see generative AI technology evolving in the future? And it's kind of crazy because I just did a post yesterday about the horse that I created in Midjourney back in November, and it looks like some kind of crazy spider monkey thing.
I saw it.
Didn't. Yeah, and so what it can do now, it's amazing, but that's less than 6 months away. So what do you see AI doing in the future? And that's going past 6 months. What do you think is going to happen? And then what role do you see yourself playing in that space?
Those are great questions, right? Because it's a deep thought process too. When we start thinking about the impact, go back a year or 2 years ago, we really weren't, conversations around AI were very few and far between. Today, it's becoming much more conversational. And I have other thoughts I'm sure we'll talk about here in a moment, but it's interesting that when we try to predict the future, we're close, but we're not accurate, right? So I think that if I were to look at a crystal ball, where is AI going to take us? I think what it does, one, for me, I know it lowers the barrier of entry. AI technology helps to lower barrier of entry for a lot of people. It helps give new people a voice in a way they've never possibly had. And this is why I'm passionate about what I do as a career, building out that technology to rural areas. I now am connecting people to tool sets with even things like AI. They now have new opportunities to explore and learn and engage. And from a personal perspective, this AI technology helps to level a playing field of opportunity for people that often have been possibly marginalized or overlooked. People with special needs. This is a great way to start engaging with new forms of conversation, a new way for them to explore their own emotional or mental state or expression, right? How do we've got to stop looking at the differences that between AI and traditional methods, but we should be looking at the similarities that we're trying to achieve in both of those methods. And from that is like being able to express yourself or share a thought or create art. I mean, look, as I mentioned, as a kid growing up, I wanted to be an artist. At some point, I knew I wanted to be in commercial art. I was doing, everything from stippling art to airbrush design I was trying everything. I was trying to learn and learn and learn. I know that now I know as an adult that those opportunities weren't always available to people that may have had a physical challenge to participate in those environments. Right. AI, barriers gone. They now can start articulating new thoughts and expressions. So I think it leads us into a new place of discovery.
I think this is fascinating. I just saw a video this morning, and I remember seeing a video similar a few weeks back where they're able to take imaging from brainwaves and show what that image is in a stable diffusion kind of setup, where the way it breaks the image down into pixels and reinterpolates it. They can do that with human thought now, which is truly fascinating. But they did a video where they showed a mouse's brain attached to this device, and the mouse was watching a video, and what they were doing was capturing the brainwaves from the mouse, showing us what the mouse was seeing. So we're able to see the video from the mouse's perspective. And what's interesting is you've got this large frame that the mouse is looking at, and his eyes are looking all around. So the video is following and moving in sequence, so you get an idea of what he's actually paying attention to. This is really interesting because it's like that next step in communication where you've got somebody who can't speak, who can't physically move to type the keyboard, but we're able to connect with the mind and allow them to have a creative space to engage in a way that's not been heard of or considered before. This is what's really exciting on the forefront of technology and where it can go next. My nephew, Sammy, he just got to come home from the hospital today. He's got some health issues, and he's lost his hearing as of Christmas this past year. And his body is more drawn, and it's just the degenerative nature of the disease that he's got. So what's happening, though, is he's still got this bright mind inside. And I think about this opportunity of being able for him, as time goes on, if this technology advances, of being able to engage and communicate outside of the realms of what's been possible with human ability. You know, when your hands are drawn and you can't properly sign, well, sign language becomes a limit. And when you're trying to type, we chat on a daily basis, but it's, he's pecking to find his next letter. So it's difficult there. But when he's able to let his thought express itself at the speed he can think it, we're going to start seeing some really cool stuff in AI.
Absolutely. 100%. Right. And because the creativity of the thought process, the new avenues of it's amazing, because I think often when we consider, I know if I consider my own experiences draw me to a different conclusion sometimes than somebody else. Well, what about people that haven't had that ability to share their experience, and now they have a new perspective that other people haven't been able to share previously, or very limited to the families and people that are close to them? Now we can express in terms of a much greater proliferation across the globe, that people with specific challenges share those same thoughts that we hadn't considered. They share similar struggles that we hadn't considered. So it's really an innovative piece that I think, we go from the simplicity of creating art with AI to really, where does it go? When you're asking the great question of what is the evolution? Well, the evolution really is boundless. And I think the easy answers are, oh, well, it's going to make entertainment fantastic. It's going to make movies beautiful. But that's not really the human experience. That's part of our it's part of our journey. It's part of the influences of our environment. But that's not who we are. So when we can start using AI to express the deeper emotional, mental capacities, that's the value. That's the value add.
Agreed. So in the actual application and use of it on a personal level, what challenges have you faced when working with generative AI, and then how have you overcome them?
Challenges, huh? Boy, what haven't we all faced at some point?
Of course.
I think it's just been, I'm not one to be afraid of failing, because when you fail, you've discovered something and you can move to the next piece, right? And you figure out, how do you overcome that failure or miss? So there were often times where I was trying to figure out how can I create action, right? So some of the exploration that I've done inside of AI is I wanted to see it become more relatable. How do we see expression, right? We look at traditional art, we look at art expression, whether that's moments in time, a piece of history, something that's being articulated. Some of the greatest masterpieces in the world come from references of biblical proportion, of references of a moment of a battle, or something that's really kind of pulls emotion out of people. So how do you do that in generative art that you're trying to create. So I tried figuring out, how do you express excitement? Well, it's not just a facial expression. There's an experience that we all have that we can relate to, right? If you're ever in one of those moments where you're backing out and you didn't see that car coming and your stomach drops for a second,
Right.
how do you express that in AI? How do you suddenly make somebody go, whoa, that was scary, or just the opposite? Something is so beautiful and so exciting that it's breathtaking. Like, how did I get here? Why am I so fortunate to see this?
Yeah.
I think those are the challenges that I've been trying to address, and using things like ChatGPT to help articulate new expression and new words also have been very valuable. I have a process to utilize. I've created these Excel spreadsheets based on specific descriptions using ChatGPT. I put in what I'm asking for. Allow it to give me different references that it sees. And I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Why? Because that's not my personal experience, right? That might be somebody else around the world, or that's somebody else's experience. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's really, and I know that it's triggering that thought in me, that it might do it to somebody else. And that's really a connection piece that we should be trying to accomplish.
I think it's fascinating what you were pointing out. That makes me think you can't remove story from the experience. And I think that's the key to this whole thing is, even the scariest movie in the world, if you have a paused, froze frame on whatever the element is, if you don't have a context leading up to that, anticipation is what really draws us. And that, the event of backing up and realizing you almost got hit, the adrenaline, well, if you freeze frame that moment in time without the context of realizing you almost got hit, it just becomes you sitting in the car. So that's really interesting, is how do we then blend those pieces so that you can make that mental connection to create that trigger. And this is, it's so much fun to me of finding ways. I've mentioned to you when we talked before, and I said on LinkedIn all the time, I was an avid reader as a child. I still read, but not to the intensity I did before. I was almost a book a day as a child, so it was ridiculous. But what's fascinating is, as you read, you find, commonality in story, the things that move people and draw, and what makes a good story. And this is something I think is really important for us to do. Is, you're right, we've got our own experience, but we've got to learn from other people and learn from other experiences how to expand so we can grow that. And this is the beauty of AI, is everybody comes to chat or comes to Midjourney and they're coming from their experience. And from, so when I share my prompt, great, it's what it did based off of how I'm approaching it. But I love putting it out there and getting, 100 other people come back with my prompt and their variations on it. You're getting a totally different image set. That's the beauty of this whole thing, is it's like the story that we bring to that interaction is what really does some amazing stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. That's so exciting. I'm sitting here, I'm getting excited about the thought of that process, because when you think about, there are so many great people that are creators and developers, many people that we've had inside of the books as well, right? I go through it and I'm like, I never thought about packaging. I'm like, wow, this is great, right? How innovative, and how would I create that? Well, I don't have that experience. I don't have that background. So for me, it's a greater struggle. So people, this argument of AI is creating things overly simplified or too easy. That's not true. There's a basis of experience and knowledge you have to create the content that you're looking for. You have to have the intrinsic knowledge and values of what you're trying to achieve. Otherwise, you're just going to get whatever comes out. And I can't come up with some of these amazing, some of the work that I'm seeing, I'm like, wow. My storyboard experience came from when I was in high school. I wanted to be an artist and thought, maybe I'll be a comic book artist one day, right? And in storyboarding for business proposals or plans and explaining why we're doing what we're doing and how this is going to change, that's far cry different than storyboarding for, I'm telling a story, that I'm actually putting out some content that's going to be related to somebody else and their experience. So it really is remarkable how the basis of individual knowledge influences their outcomes using these tools.
Yeah, okay, so this actually is a great segue, because you mentioned comic book. So my next question kind of leads us into this space, but this is, I think, a perfect time to kind of mention something. So I'm going to ask the question, then I'm going to fill it in with a little information. The question is, can you share with us some of your favorite generative AI creations and what inspired you to create them? So I can't help but introduce at this point, you created a comic book, right?
I did. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I did. It was super fun, right? Because like I said, I've always wanted to be, what you don't see on the walls here and around me are my comic books and I try to keep it semi-professional for the background, right? It doesn't help when I have some of the toys down there on the floor that my kids give me, but it's been an influence to me, as somebody that appreciates the different artistic expressions. But yeah, I did. I created a comic book because I felt this was a great way to explore the tools. How do I start creating repetition? How do you find a single character that you can pull in over and over and over again? Because it seemed to be so all over the board, right? In creation sometimes. And I did leverage ChatGPT. I said, here's what I wanted to do. Here's the setting. Here's the characters. Help me fill in the blanks of how would they communicate? What is the struggle? Give me, and that comes back to a writing process, right? You have to understand the writing process to put in, give me the who, what, when, where, why. What is the struggle? Who's the conflict? Who's your antagonist? Who's your protagonist? And then have it help fill in and watching it create, and you're like, I don't like that. But what's nice is that you've got this foundation. You've got this center framework. You're like, I can kind of work with this. So it allows us to go from having to do the storyboarding and we have an idea what we want. We just aren't sure how to get there. To have something creating an outline for us and say, I don't like this. I'm changing this. This is not going to be a villain. This is going to be a hero. And here's how and why. And then go back and you rewrite it a little bit. And then you add that into your Midjourney or other tools, and you see what it produces. You're like, these scenes aren't what I'm thinking. And then you go and make alterations. I want it to look like this. I want page yellowing. I want subtle details. And you start refining it over time. And it was an exciting process. Yeah, I called it, it's book one, Sheriff. And it was really just about a sheriff in a broken Western town and trying to bring law to a lawless place. And part of that was inspired by where I live here in Arizona. I've discovered so many towns that historically were lawless towns in the West.
Right. That's awesome. So how long
I brought kind of a personal experience.
Right. How long was your process to go from your original concept of I want to do this to actually having something produced?
It took me a while because there was a lot of trial and error. It probably took me about 90 days to get the whole thing done. And I worked on it pretty regularly. I mean, like every day I would be in there for an hour or two or longer on the weekends trying to say, no, I don't like this. This is just not, this doesn't touch the mark, right? And then I decided at one point that I'm going to come through the whole conclusion, and I kind of drafted it out on a piece of paper and said, I want these following scenes to happen. So then I would go back through and try and see if I can get the images to be before I created the prompts, right? Before I created the storyboard. And then I fit the story to the image. I'm like, oh, this looks like a great scene if there were something to happen in this bar, right? So that's what I did.
Right.
It was a great process. I really enjoyed it.
Are you planning on doing another comic book now?
It's so funny. I think I am, but I think I'm going to change the format because now the tools have evolved so much in the last 6 months, as you pointed out, that I'm not on version 3 anymore. There's no 5.1, which I haven't even started from yesterday. I'm like, every time you turn around, it's a new version that's coming out, it seems. So I've got a long way to go from iterations.
Yeah.
And then that goes back to illustrate, Brian, the work that you're doing with these books. For me to create something on my own that I was exploring and learning, that's not an easy process. So for you to have this organization, mindset of what you want, how you want it, and the people that are participating, I want to applaud all the people that are participating because they've all done a fantastic job at being focused and knowing what they wanted to be on.
Yeah, that's what's been exciting to me is, I'm one of those people who's the expression of jack of all trades. I can do a little bit of everything, and I'm actually pretty good at a lot of things. But that's not the normal for everybody else in the world. Not everybody spends every waking moment trying to figure out how to do something new and become good at it. But when you've got a lot of people, like we've already talked about, everybody comes to the table with their own skill set, their knowledge, their experience, and as they engage with the AI, the things they create are reflections of them. So having each of them tell the story about how they do something, it's been really amazing. And it's funny, like this last book, there were 2 different lessons on doing packaging, and yet they're totally different approaches. And I love that aspect.
Absolutely.
Actually, there's 3 because I've got Roberto as well, who did the whole lesson on product development, so, and he in there talks about packaging. So it's really fascinating to see how everybody coming at it from different angles, you come up with totally unique perspectives. Well, how do you see?
And I think that's the power of it. It's great.
Agreed. How do you see generative AI being used in industries outside of the traditional art world?
Oh, I think I really think it's limitless. And when I say that, it sounds so cliche, but it really is. It helps with. So as somebody that was a design engineer for a period of time, I still have that in the back of my head when I look at a problem. There's got to be another way to come at this, because sometimes the one solution that we have in our head isn't the right one. Though it looks like it fits. It makes sense that it should work, but it doesn't, right? I think from an AI perspective and what's happening with the workload, I'll give you an example. So my daughter, my youngest daughter, does have a wheelchair. So I look at challenges that she faces on a regular basis. I can actually utilize AI to start me helping believe in new concepts for solutions for the cup holder that she has and why it doesn't work, and how would AI help me look at this design? And then I can take that and take that concept and then start designing an actual product, put it on my 3D printer, print it, and then put it on her chair and see, oh, it works. Look. Now,
nice.
There's all kinds of little things like that around the house. So if I little things that are made of a type of material, plastic that's been created, that's some of this new tools that AI offers are those complex solutions, because we're familiar. We work with what we're familiar with. A lot of times, if we see something being done a specific way, we tend to repeat that same process. We learn from the person that taught us previously. Were they the most efficient at it, and where did they get that? So, that's kind of like if I were to have a choice of somebody to help teach me the painting, I would probably ask Rembrandt, because I love his effective light. I love the way he utilized those. But what was that process? How did he come to that?
Right.
You can listen to all kinds of teachers and people that have studied it, yet their effect is just there's something different, and I can't figure out sometimes what that one thing is. So there's something about it that AI will help us to see new solutions to old problems, and especially when we face new problems. I begin space exploration. I think it's fascinating. I've been very fortunate. I've had to work with SpaceX on a couple issues before for remote areas, and right now here in Arizona, we're looking at building a new spaceport, and I'm hoping to be able to get in front of some of them, because the challenges they face may also be required to pull in some AI concepts.
I think that's awesome. That's really exciting to see how we can use these things that we're exploring really for the fun of it, to find them as being practical and useful and generating new things altogether. So,
absolutely. And on that note, real quick, Brian, what I would like to say is another piece is in my career, I was very fortunate to be able to participate in a lot of different conferences and events, and I've got to see a lot of new and evolving technology that later became mainstream. Right, there was a point in time where I was one of the Google explorers when they had the Glass. I actually have a Google Glass here in this room. It's actually in that drawer. My Google Glass is an explorer for that, and people thought, you're going to spend $1,000 to participate in that thing. Are you nuts? And I'm like, what? I'm going to work hard. I earn the money. I'm going to go and learn, and this helps me. And at one point, legislation came in and said, there's concerns about privacy when it came to facial recognition in these tool sets. Well, now it's everywhere. Now we allow that commonplace, but that technology started in a specific framework, and it was in the hands of John Q. Public from a technology standpoint. So when I look at what happens with AI, it's in John Q. Public's hands right now. Somebody is going to take that and move it into another evolution. And being the early explorer, being the early adopter, gives us an advantage to understand how it works, what it looks like, why it exists. It gives us that different connection to what we see that will become a norm at some point.
Yeah, I think the early adopters, they understand the technology from a different framework, because their approach is not how do I actually, fit this into everything I'm doing right now. It's really future focused with, this is a really cool thing. I think it could do some interesting stuff, and I want to get in the front of it right now and, see what I can do with it. That's what I think is so cool about the AI.
Yeah. Well, what happens when we start getting to the point where we can already scan the brain, we can already do 3D models of the brain. What happens when we start asking AI to translate this information into something else? Give me that same brain. What about surgery? What type of options are available to us? How do we help people with different brain conditions? Whether that's unfortunately maybe a form of cancer, maybe somebody has seizures. But there could be solutions to these challenges that AI presents, and it can translate now in a digital environment to the best and brightest around the world. That you can get the best doctor available to you that may be in India, that may be in Europe, that may be in America. You don't know where they are, but we can, once we identify some of those capacities, and we can utilize these tools, that they don't even need the actual brain scan. They can get the AI interpretation of what's happened and start building models of all these scans and what it looks like. What's the common traits we see in these conditions? What's the common traits? It's so much opportunity, and it's a beautiful opportunity, right? Put together in an ethical practice, it's going to be very, very powerful.
Agreed. My wife and I were talking about, the idea of how AI could be integrated into the health system. She was trained as a nurse, and she was an RN. And in that space, one of the things that's interesting is, there's a lot of things that a nurse has to keep going active in their head as they're making their rounds and dealing with patients. Now, an iPad or, clipboard, those are great for the individual patients. But imagine an AI interface that's engaged with each of these patients. As you step up, it's got their history, and you can deal with, there's this certain thing that just happened, or they're just flatlined. What are some of the triggers that could be creating this event? How do we solve this fastest? And it doesn't mean it's driving everything. It's helping the nurse and the doctors keep up with all the things that are going on and giving them, here's some options based off of this patient's needs and their current situation. You can fast track so much information and help the decision-making process to refine a lot of those things that could be negative impactors.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% with you on that.
Okay, so how do you balance the technical aspects of using generative AI with the creative aspects of producing artwork or producing whatever kind of thing you're after?
Ooh, that's a tricky question. Let's see. How do you balance the technical aspects? I think training, right? It's funny because there is something that's intrinsic in people that they want to. I firmly believe that in general, the human population likes to be centralized in their communities. They try not to expand too great beyond those communities. However, there are very few people that if they didn't explore beyond, we wouldn't have expanded anywhere. So there are people that are intrinsically curious, that they're intrinsically designed to go into someplace new and adventure forth. I tease my wife all the time. If they were going to send people to Mars and I had an opportunity, I'd be on it. I'll try it, sure. And she's she's absolutely no.
Yeah.
And even then, I think that's the best way to learn is to experience sometimes though. Experience is, the question, you may have heard this before, people are like, well, what if you fail? What if I succeed?
Right.
It's the failure. One thing is guaranteed. You get what you ask for. If you don't ask for anything, that's exactly what you're going to get. Nothing.
Exactly.
So you've got to pursue the opportunities. And I had a great conversation with a person yesterday, a friend, and she had said, it's the art of the possible that paralyzes people. That when they start recognizing, I want to accomplish X, it's suddenly their brain starts rolling into, well, I've got to do this and this and this and this. And then it becomes overwhelming, like, you know what? It's just too scary. I could fail at any one of those points. That's true.
Right.
That's true. You can. But if you fail at one of those points, you've learned, go back a couple steps and start over. You'll figure it out. It will solve. But it's a matter of persistence. And just like I think I'd heard it once before in another session that you had, somebody had stated, I apologize, I don't recall who it was, but they had stated that a process is about, or to be successful in something, the process becomes practice and effort, right? That you have to commit time and repetition. It may take a year or two, but at some point you'll become good at it.
Yes.
That's what has to happen, that people don't like not being good at something, and other people excel at learning how to be better at one or two things. I'm
Right.
much like you, I think, Brian. I'm a jack of all trades and a master of I'm not even sure what. But it's I know, and I enjoy doing. I enjoy learning. I enjoy teaching. And the art of the possible is really something I think is it pushes me to do something different.
Well, there's so much fun in the process of discovery, and I think this is, I think it's. I don't know if you've watched the Ted Lasso series on Apple. My wife and I have become big fans of that. We've enjoyed the whole idea, but one of the key things that he points out in the first 2 seasons is about remaining curious. And I think that's something to me that really is the lifeblood of what I do. Is I'm curious. I'm insatiably curious. I want to know. I want to learn. I want to grow. And I think when we lack curiosity is where we begin to stop. And what I mean by that is not just stop exploring, but kind of stop living, because we close our bubble to this little bitty space. And it's like, when you're not curious, it means you don't want anything new coming at you. And there's a measure of safety, it seems, when you lack curiosity, because you've made your world small. But like, I'm afraid I'm going to miss out on something. So I keep my mind wide open to be curious, to see the next thing. So to me, it's like infectious. I've got to know.
It is, absolutely. And it's what else is great is that people like you, Ryan, and many other people that you've had on the space, and people I can collaborate with, whether that's on a Twitter forum or a space that they may have created. And I think it's about, we have to educate ourselves about the people that we surround ourselves with when it comes to that mindset.
Yeah.
On how do we continue to grow and encourage ourselves, is to be around like-minded people. And find somebody
Agreed.
that's better at something than you are, and follow them and learn from them. And I've been very blessed, I think, in my career to have been around both good and bad people that have provided, when I say bad, just in that's what they did wasn't for me. That's just not my personality. It's just not who I am. So it's not they're bad people, but it just didn't fit who I was as a mold. So
Certainly.
I think it's a matter of being able to, how do we continue to be kind, humble, and learn, but find the group, find the collective, right? Because just
Right.
the same as those that like to be in their little collectives in their communities, these communities can be around the world, and you're still in your community. You're still learning together. So, I'm with you. I get very excited when it comes to talking about what's possible, where is it going to go, the challenges we all faced. What I like is that, like, it's like I've been tempted to post some of my complete failures just to show people that it's okay to fail. These just did not come out the way I expected. This was a miss, and here's how. There's a lesson to learn here, and I think I've learned it, and if I could share with others, great.
I think that's important for us to do.
Yeah.
I actually, every once in a while, at least every other week, I will post a complete failure, because I want people to understand it's not every time I sit in front of Midjourney, it's creating something awesome. That goes back to the horses. When I originally posted that back in November, everybody's, look how great Midjourney's doing. And, to see where it's failing, it's actually good for us all.
Well, it's so funny. I had a couple that I was going to share with you, that couple pieces that I had done. One that I'm most proud of was one that I called Star Cow. And it's really just a cow that's wearing a space helmet. Yeah. Now, it's in a suit. It just came out. I had this vision in my head, and I had been working so hard to learn. And when I produced it, and this was not recently. This was many, many months ago, and it came out so well. I was like, wow! It blew me away at the way it came out. So I'm really proud of that one, because that was like a benchmark for me when I was doing. And I know it sounds silly, but we all have our little thing that we like to lean back on. And for me, I like cows. I think they're cool. So I was doing some art of cows and different. I mean, when you look at some of the great painters, right? Hopper had some great cow paintings, and so for me, I was just looking artistically, and then I was thinking about the future and cows in space, and just being kind of silly with it. And it came out so well. Whereas now, it's funny because my most recent creation, which I've submitted to a couple places and shows around the world, is there's one that I created, but it's more surreal. It's less realistic. I think I've gotten to the comfort point of realizing that I can do real. Now, can I create something that I'm really inspired by, intrinsically by its content?
Right.
More than just what I've established. Because I think it's just a personal thing.
Right. Well, that's actually the nature of design and painting, particularly. Like if you look at the work of Picasso, he started with professional training in realism. He learned from the masters. This is the rules of light, line, how to get everything right to create this perfect thing. And then he began transitioning away from that to explore the whole new genre of style that he created, because he was a master of the original. Sort of like you said, you can make it real. So what's the next thing? And I think that's the way most of the Impressionist works have come from, people who are really good at the reproduction. But like Picasso and the others who've happened in the 1900s, they came along when photography was coming to a forefront. So cameras could capture real really, really well and fast. So what's the next thing you can do? And I think this is what we're going to be facing in the AI era of AI can do things way faster than I can do, with Photoshop and a camera. So what is the next step, or what is the next place in the iteration?
Absolutely. And it's funny because, it's only because of AI that I actually started painting again too, though. It's interesting because I've learned more about different artistic styles. I've learned more about art appreciation. And I've taken those classes in college and university, and I practiced, but it wasn't the same as it is now. Now I have this, maybe that's the type of learner I am, right? Is I'm from the different modalities that are existing for options for me to learn from. This is a modality that works. I can put this in and see the result and go, oh, now I get it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the power of it when it comes to education and being able to empower people how they can leverage this from art into the next thing.
Have you seen the TED Talk that Khan from Khan Academy just released? I think might have been last week or early this week. That's worth watching because he talks about the effect AI is going to have on education. And they started back in October working with ChatGPT and being able to integrate it into a training platform. So they've created basically a conversational piece that will interact with the student. And it allows each individual student to have it's almost like having a one-to-one relationship with a tool that guides you towards how to solve for the answer. In other words, you can ask the computer, what's the answer to this? And, ChatGPT and generally can answer it. But what they've done with this Khan Academy thing is it literally will allow the student to learn in the best way possible with this. It kind of learns you. And instead of giving you the answer, it walks you through how to achieve the answer. And I think this is where, the whole idea of one-to-one ratio with student to teacher, this is amazing. But the other side of that is it also works for the teachers to know where all the students are in their learning process. And it allows them, it engages with them and keeps them on track with their students. So you're not just guessing how this student's learning, it's actually giving you feedback in real time for how to, engage the student. So I'm excited of where the future is going to go with this kind of stuff.
Oh, 100, absolutely, Brian. No, and that's where you asked a question earlier, like, where do I see myself as part of it? I think that's where I see myself as part of it, is being able to help with that, right? Is because the adoption rate is not going to be from slowly from the student's perspective, but more from the educator's perspective, more from the administration's perspective, because there's a fear, lack of knowledge, lack of understanding. And so when you look at what's possible, again, for education, K-12, or higher education, those types of engagements with artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, those are just new tools. I mean, it's fantastic. What a great new tool that we have to empower people to start asking new questions, to get new answers, new results, and then learn how to articulate the question they really are trying to ask. So I would love to watch. I'm going to definitely watch that that talk. You know,
It's exciting.
yeah,
It's exciting
I
to
actually
see.
wrote. It is exciting. I've actually written some curriculum that I presented to a university or to a college here in Arizona. I gave them a call, said, "How would you like to present a course? If we did say a 2-day course, or we even do it as a 2-week course, however you want it, we can extrapolate that much time. But we do it
Right.
over the summer course, do it as a continuing education, lower the barrier for cost, keep it a low cost entry point, get students engaged. And for me, that's about engaging and empowering the community members to understand what this is and how it works,
Right.
right? And then even then I offered they offer these summer courses for students for K-12 kids. They call it a summer camp program in university. And I presented that to them and said, we can even offer this as a course for kids that's 3 days long, and I'll walk them through how to do these little things, or we can make it a week, do it a week program for a couple hours every day. Parents will drop their kids off. They'll teach them how to use this on the technology, what it looks like. Then they can go home and excitedly tell their parents. And you would not believe the resistance I got. It was no. It was, I had no's, and I was like, how do we have no's? How would you not want to do this? I'm not looking to make money on this. I'm really just trying to educate people. I'm talking like, let's charge $25 so that they have skin in the game and the kid shows up or the parent shows up to take the course. Right? This is not about money. This is about educating people on how these tools work and why they're value added and why we should lower the barrier of entry. We should reduce fear over what the technology actually means and the applications that it provides. We may have somebody that's going to attend this thing that has never participated that will revolutionize the next phase. We have no idea. But it's amazing that we have some resistance right now still. And you know, I'm working towards breaking down that barrier. That's part of my hope personally.
Certainly. Okay, so this is a really good segue to the next point then. So how do you personally approach collaboration within the AI space with other creators and artists, and then those who are outside of this field? And what's been some of your most memorable collaborative experiences? This is really good, especially you just talking about trying to engage and get teachers and get teaching opportunities involved.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question too. So, you know, being proactive. So part of the extended collaborations. You know, I could talk about collaborations that I've had where we've just tried to do little art pieces and see if we can't create little storylines. But I think the ones that I really like or when we had a collaboration between a marketing event with a local city that their art district is trying to figure out how to revitalize their downtown area. How do they start getting people back to coming for economic development? And building a partnership with that marketing group, the city. We're right now in conversations to talk about how can we get a space to help educate people. We can bring people in on a weekly or biweekly basis. We actually have a specific work group that's part of I don't know why I can't think of it, Chamber of Commerce. So there's a Chamber of Commerce group that's interested in participating, so that way they can bring in local business leaders. Again, it's about, I've been finding this to be a fun collaboration because it's about explaining how the tools work, why they're value added. Try to remove the fear that it's replacing people, that it's a starting point. It's no longer replacing people. That's not the goal. We've got to take that thought process out. There's never been a paradigm shift in technology that hasn't caused that same fear and reaction, and usually has resulted in different developments of new opportunities rather than reduction of old. So I'm hoping that we can keep that process up. It's a fun collaboration for sure.
Awesome. Okay, so here's always the touchy point. Can you discuss any ethical considerations or potential negative impacts of generative AI technology, and then how you're approaching these? Because I know when you're dealing with the education side, when you're trying to reach into that space, there's no's, and their noses are because of fears and other things. So what are you doing to approach or address those issues?
That's a really good question. I think that's a tough one that a lot of people should ask. I think they should ask themselves that all the time, is how are you addressing the naysayers that maybe unfortunately, fear has a huge emotional control on the human being. It creates a lot of irrational decisions. It creates panic. So there were a couple things you mentioned earlier that I didn't want to turn the conversation, but when I think about the blockchain, what the blockchain offers for solutions for personal control of data and information, how we we can do decentralized finance. We have greater access to our own records. We're in control. We're not, when we talked about healthcare, I would have my own healthcare records if I had that on the blockchain. I wouldn't have to have those being transferred from person to person to person, that my loved ones would be able to share that information and pass it along and give me the healthcare that I needed.
Right.
So when it comes to AI and the fears that are concerns, it comes down to, as you said, I think the word is ethics, right? The ethical behavior of, there were standards that were set in boy howdy. When were those standards set? By the machine learn, what is it? Is it NIMI? The machine learning, I apologize, I can't even think of the name of it.
I think I know what you're talking about.
It's standard practice of ethical behavior with technology. And at that time, it was about computer systems because none of this existed. Well, I don't know if you're aware, but just the other day, the White House had issued a statement regarding the Artificial Intelligence Bill of Rights. I've read through that. There's a lot of fear that comes forward. And how do we build the collaboration from a standpoint as explorers, as leaders, as people that have been in the space? How do we get our community members to be activated and know what they should be doing and how they should be communicating and educating those that are policymakers? Because my concern over the ethics behavior is there's not a law that's ever been created that still isn't broken because of an unethical behavior. You can't legislate ethical behaviors. You set those as guidelines to help produce better results and identify a norm for the society to behave. We're in a global society in this platform, and that creates a significant challenge because the ethical challenges from one household to the next in the same neighborhood is different, let alone around the world. So
Agreed.
How do you balance that? I think my biggest fear is not that we will have unethical use of artificial intelligence, because that will happen with legislation or not. My biggest fear when it comes to what's happening with artificial intelligence is that it's legislated out of the hands of the right people in the good uses, and we become disempowered for these conversations. We won't have these conversations to explore, learn, grow, find new applications, talk to the next, who knows, we could have that, somebody might watch this that's actually in healthcare and goes, I never thought of that, and call you up and say, Brian, tell me how we could do that. What are your thoughts? But we won't do that if it's legislated to the point where we don't have access. So, and they issued, there was another statement that was made, my apologies, I got it right here as a matter of fact. There was a recent notification that was issued from the White House. It looks like it's not going to pull up. Maybe it will. Let's see. They just issued a statement on, goodness gracious, I apologize here. I don't mean to delay us.
You're fine. We can always cut stuff out. So,
okay, here it is. The White House announces critical. So there's a recent announcement that the White House announces a critical and emerging tech strategy. So reading through the strategy, I encourage people, go out and become self-empowered. Go find these things, go look them up, interpret them for yourself. The challenges that creates, however, are some of the decisions or the actions that are being recommended seem to be done in a vacuum, that there's not a lot of discussion that's being hosted for communities or participants that might be subject matter experts. The discussion of what this means for the use of artificial intelligence could have significant implications. So I'm actually a participant. I'm a member of the Government Blockchain Association. And so we talk about how does the government play a part in blockchain legislation, artificial intelligence development, the use of money, currency, digital currency. And so these standards for critical and emerging technology are the foundation, could lead us, because we have some different experiences and knowledge, to evaluate this in a different format than somebody that has never read it before or understands what the technology means. This could be very restrictive. So I think it's important when it comes down to concerns about artificial intelligence, ethical behavior is certainly a challenge. Absolutely. The ethical applications, businesses, IP addressing or the use of IP, it's very interesting. Again, not long ago, the intellectual property there was a statement that was made: intellectual property is not going to be covered for artificial intelligence generation materials. That doesn't qualify for a copyright. Well, what's interesting is, okay, so now you're going to have to start defining what artificial intelligence is, simply because there are many, many musical artists that create artificial intelligent music that they now sync up to their voices, or they have voice modifiers for that through an artificial intelligence platform. Okay, so is that no longer copyright? Can we now copy their songs arbitrarily because it fit that mold? Or is there some other, are you going to keep it under the clause of record and record labeling and entertainment that has a copyright? Because if so, art is an entertainment. Art is simply an entertainment. Every piece you create is an entertainment piece. So it's really interesting to see where this is going to go. I think it gets a little sticky, but I think those are the things I really get passionate about too, because I've been in higher ed and government for so long that I'm familiar with what those challenges can be and how if they're not carefully discussed, they could be overregulated.
Agreed. There's interesting, man, my brain went through so many loops and conversations on my own listening to you talk. One thing that came to mind is how they're trying to define the AI element with separation of how to protect it. And it only is when you've got human hand engagement. In other words, human hand has to be involved in the whole process. And prompting doesn't qualify. But what's amazing is, so I can create something that takes me days to get the right prompt. It creates something and it produces an image. I can't copyright that image, but another person can take that image that I've shared publicly, grab that image, drop it into a Photoshop document, play with color, throw some text across it, and that becomes copyrightable because human hand engagement. So this is something I've actually pointed out to creators, is if you're going to take the image and want to use it and have it protected, then all you got to do is then pull it into Photoshop, pull it into Illustrator, begin manipulating and creating human hand engagement, and it becomes a new piece. So there's always a workaround.
Sign it. Put a little signature at the bottom corner.
That's right. So I think this was an easy question because we've answered. Brian. Yeah.
It's a great, honestly, it's the type of topic I think that gets vastly overlooked. I think it's vastly overlooked and marginalized because it's again, the art of the possible. This becomes a piece that's ugly and nobody wants to talk about or deal with. But if you don't, it's going to come back. And that will be a failure point after you've made progress already.
Right. So how do you, this one's easy, but how do you stay inspired and continue to push the boundaries of what's possible with generative AI technology?
Oh, you're right, Brian. That is easy. I mean, goodness, it's finding my culture, right? Finding people around me that do the same things. They're inspiring. I mean, I do a lot more reading than I do contributing in a lot of threads because it's too much to contribute everything you see and that you find value in. I mean, there are, and then I don't want to come off as being arbitrary either in some of the lessons or the conversations that are happening by saying, excellent point, good, right? I'm trying to actually provide a meaningful conversation and dialogue. So sometimes it appears that I'm absent. And I think that's the hard part, I think, of trying to stay relatable and relevant to things, is that there's a balance to seeing, understanding, learning, applying, but then engaging. You have to re-engage somehow.
Yeah.
Just because then people will start seeing you as more of that resident expert, that voice in the room. And I do think that's needed, because that's how you get standards that are being developed. At some point, hopefully the right legislators will call on those people and say, hey, tell us about this. Help explain to me, what is AI? What is blockchain? What is that? What is that? And if we know who those people are, I may not be the right person, but I know enough people in the circles that I can say, this is the person that I would recommend. This is and so we have to be engaged in social efforts, whether that's on Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, different channels of engagement. There are so many good people that are trying to do the right things for the very right reasons, and there's so many great lessons. And it's remarkable, because I think the more you do this, the more you're engaged with something you're passionate about, you can separate the wheat from the chaff pretty easily when you look at content. You can see who is actually working hard who is learning, and you can also see who's just, this is a copy paste person. They're really just getting hyped. They're not diving in. And there's a relationship you have to build with that content. And the creator might be a fantastic person, but the content really, does it touch you? Does it make you feel like you need to act and participate in that?
Yeah, agreed. Agree completely. So I was excited to have you jump in literally at the last minute, and you saved us as we were putting together the AI Explore Collaborations Book 2. So thank you for your participation in that. Without reteaching your lesson, tell us, like, what's the biggest takeaway, and kind of something that you think, if they got nothing else, what is it that you were really hoping to contribute in the lesson that you put together?
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate Brian reaching out to me at that last minute. You know, I had so many other thoughts in my head. That was one that was really easy on the top of my head to pull together and put out there, because it was a struggle for me to understand when I was developing, go back to the comic book. That really was what it was, is that I was working so hard on that comic book and trying to figure out, how do I keep this art consistent, right? What pieces of everything I'm putting in here is the key to consistency? And what I discovered was the use of things like the seed phrase. If you can figure out what the seed phrase is, which is not uncommon in any programming language, you have specific prompts that you can use, reference that or recalls that piece, and you can reuse it. So this is all I was trying to do, is figure out, how do I leverage something like the seed phrase, and what happens if I, in those types of utilizations to create similar content, or actually maintain a character, even though it might change something about the image a little bit, that can be managed. But sometimes the swings were so wide in what you were getting in results, that I wanted similarities, and I can figure out how to make that work, right? And it was I created thousands of images to try and get together a 7-page comic book. Just because it was
understandable,
not easy. I learned a lot about the value of using something like the seed. And the seed really was valuable in version 4. Now that you're on 5, and I don't know about 5.1 because I haven't dove into it yet, but in 5, they really didn't re-leverage it the same way they did with the version 4. So I think it's a matter of, again, this goes back to I feel like that's a good example why people that are engaging with these tools should understand what the different versions do and why they did what they did. Because if they want to reuse the seed phrase again in 5, it's not going to work the same. It's just not. In 5.1, I don't know how it's going to work. But knowing which tool to select in that same set of tools.
So, bringing this to a close, we've almost used up an entire hour of your time. Actually, we have definitely used up more than an hour of your time, so thank you. But what would be a good wrap-up or takeaway that you might have, if you had something else to kind of leave people thinking around AI space? What's something good for them to be putting their brains around from your perspective?
I guess the one thing I would say is people need to pursue things that they may not even be familiar with. I was very fortunate. I got invited to attend a meeting out in Hollywood, and I'm going in 2 weeks. Going to be out there with all these creative writers, directors, and artists, and that's not my forte, right? But if by stepping away from that opportunity, I'm failing to take an exploratory look at something new and different. And I think that's maybe why I was pulled into that conversation, is because I'm not in that field. So I'm not going to sell them on an idea or a concept. I'm going to share the knowledge that I have the best way that I know how. So I think that opens up new avenues that people consider. Go somewhere you're not familiar. Practice something you're not familiar with. Because in this space, the next person that needs that skill set might say, hey, why don't you come and talk to us and inform us, right?
For sure.
And I think a lot of times, I think a lot of people get intrinsically focused on a specific object or project. And I like to think in a big scope of things, and how does this impact many, many days from now or years from now? What is the result of this action today? I mean, I could articulate that in another sense. I'm actually working on a federal grant that I'm looking to get approved for. That federal grant's going to help provide a technology platform of infrastructure that's going to service farming communities. Okay, so why is that important? Because from there, it's water conservation. Water conservation is a big topic in the world right now. If I can help them with the backbone of technology that provides them better tools to get better water quality controls and produce the same amount of agriculture, we don't have food shortage problems. So it's a matter of tying your effort to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. What's the end result of your actions or the things you're trying to learn? What are you hoping in the end is impacted?
Love that. This is something my wife and I talk about all the time, is we don't stop at how it feels or what it looks like on the surface level. There's a second and a third order of effects. And thinking outside of that initial impact, what does this look like further down the road? So I love that you're approaching it that way. This is brilliant. Okay, so this has been fantastic, PJ. I've really appreciated it. What are some good ways for people to kind of stay on top of what you're doing? What's the best platforms to follow you? LinkedIn, I know you're active on. What are the things?
Well, that's very kind too. I'm on LinkedIn, easy to find, PJ Way, you'll find me. I put a lot of my AI stuff. I actually created a website just to put some of my art up. It's pjwai.xyz.
Nice.
And then I have, let me see, what's the other one I have? Well, and then my Instagram, it's the same thing. I have an Instagram that's pjwai.xyz. So you'll find probably more recent stuff on Instagram simply because it's so easy to upload and put it in there. It's like, done.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, thank you again, PJ.
You betcha. Yeah, my name is PJ Way, and you just enjoyed another episode of the AI Explorers, the AI Creators Collective, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Brian. You're doing amazing work, and everybody that's contributed to those books, as well as those that contribute in conversations that I'm having on the side. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate it.